having cystic fibrosis and knowing God has made sense of my suffering. My name is Jemima. I'm from Limerick. I'm 23 years old. I recently graduated from the University of Limerick with a first class honours in Law Plus, and I have cystic fibrosis. I was the first girl born into a family of 4 boys, so my mom was very protective of me. CF kind of added to that, and she was a bit more mama bear on me. Throughout primary school, my CF, which is cystic fibrosis, didn't affect me as much as it did in secondary school and university. The main struggle I had in primary school was actually trying to maintain weight. I found it very difficult to manage my medication, so I was constantly taking too much or too little, and I wasn't digesting my food properly, because one of the main things with cystic fibrosis is that your pancreas doesn't function properly, so you're constantly trying to guess how much medication to take. So for a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old child, that's quite difficult. I was constantly underdeveloped, I was constantly underweight, I was just finding it hard, even energy levels, having to eat so much more food than other people. Things progressed quite a lot onto secondary school, and even more so into college, because cystic fibrosis is it's a progressive illness. So the older you get, the worse it gets. And I remember regularly throughout my whole life, I would have different physiotherapists and doctors trying to explain to me so that I understood the severity of cystic fibrosis, so that I wouldn't become complacent. And they would constantly say, just imagine 2 lungs on a screen, and CF is basically mucus building at the bottom of your lungs. And over time, through chest infections, through viral infections, bacterial infections, it gets progressively worse. So your lungs are basically eroding over time. That can eventually lead to a lung transplant or not, if you're not fortunate enough to get one. I was raised in a Christian home, so I always had a very Christian influence, Christian morals. I had a lot of people praying for me. I had godly parents who had a real faith in the Lord, but I never had that personal relationship with Christ until I was 19. And I would constantly hear Bible verses and take them out of context just because I didn't understand what they meant. And one verse that I always kind of held close to me for the first 19 years of my life was that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And due to not being a Christian, I didn't understand what that verse meant. So I felt as though that the duty was on me, the responsibility was on me, that I can do all things. I can do it. I have to work hard enough. So I was always very academic. I was always very disciplined and very, very driven. And I felt as if I didn't achieve something, that was my fault, that's on me. But it wasn't until I got saved at the age of 19 and I understood what it meant, all things through Christ. And it was that I can achieve these things if it's God's will and if it's in Christ. The night I became a Christian at age 19, I was actually listening to a sermon at a Christian conference, and the pastor was speaking on the verse about how the devil is a roaring lion who walks about seeking whom he may devour. And I remember sitting there in fear, because fear was something that had really gripped me from the age of 17 to 19, because my CF was catastrophic and it was just accumulating, and I knew that I didn't necessarily have long to go, or it wasn't going to have I didn't have much hope for my future, to be honest. And I was sitting there and he was speaking about this verse, and he just completely tore it apart for those that are in Christ. And it was that you don't have to worry about the roaring lion, you don't have to worry about the sting of sin and Satan, because if Christ is on your side, he's your defender and he's your protector. And it was for the first time ever that I had heard somebody preach the gospel, and I completely believed it. I didn't cry, I didn't say anything, and I didn't tell anybody, but I remember walking out of the church and up a hill, and I just was completely floored. I remember saying to my mom, that was a really good sermon. And she says, yeah. And I was like, no, it was really good. And she was like, yeah, it was. But you see, I had just got saved that night, and I had truly believed that Christ died for me and that he loved me, and that he wasn't going to let anything happen to me that he didn't know about or that he didn't have a greater purpose for. any sickness and suffering, whether it be a long-term illness like I have or a short-term illness like you may be experiencing today, it can be a very isolating and lonely experience, and it can be a very fearful one because you don't want to put your burdens on other people and you don't want your sickness affecting your loved ones around you. But ever since I became a Christian at the age of 19, it has been such an encouragement to know that Jesus Christ bore my sickness, my weakness, and my sins on Calvary, and that He knows exactly how I feel. And every single day He is walking with me in this journey of life throughout this sickness, and He is my rock, He is my strength. It's like to suffer without having Christ, but having cystic fibrosis and knowing God has made sense of my suffering. Because before I became a Christian, death was my focal point. It was something that I feared, something that I dreaded. But now being a Christian, eternity is my hope and death is gain. My life now has a purpose. It has a greater calling. I'm no longer living just to suffer. I'm living for Christ. And that when I die, CF, cystic fibrosis, is left in the grave. As I said before, when Jesus Christ died on Calvary, He took my sickness and my sin. So He hasn't just dealt with cystic fibrosis, but He's also dealt with my sin. And that for me is far much more important than just cystic fibrosis, because that has eternal purpose, that has eternal consequences. And I know that when I die, I'll be free from cystic fibrosis and I'll also be free from sin. Knowing Jesus Christ has made sense of my suffering. But not only that, it's given my life purpose and it's given me peace. And you can have that too.